My parents ignored me because I had a brother and sister who were the golden children. All the money was allocated to their education, while I worked 3 jobs and studied on my own. One day, they asked me. Growing up, I always felt like the odd one out in my own family. It was this quiet, constant weight on my shoulders, like I'd stepped into a story where my role was already written for me. My older sister Jessica and my brother Alex were practically worshipped by our parents. There was no hiding it. I was the third wheel in a family of golden children. Jessica was the perfect daughter, the one who ticked every box on the ideal child checklist. She was gorgeous, smart, and so charismatic it was hard not to get pulled into her orbit. She had this knack for making everyone around her feel like she was doing them a favor just by being there. And my parents fell for it hard. She'd breeze through school, bring home a stack of awards, and every little achievement would be celebrated like it was a Nobel Prize. Family dinners were mostly Jessica's highlight reel, and I got so used to it that I'd mentally check out, staring at the mashed potatoes on my plate. Then there was Alex, the genius, the child prodigy, the future of the family, as my parents liked to call him. They set up a college fund for him when he was barely out of diapers, also he could go to the best schools, join the best clubs, and have the best of everything. I'd hear them whispering about his potential and how they just couldn't let it go to waste. And I'd sit there, invisible. He never had to worry about money. They made sure he was taken care of. Even when he decided to study some obscure subject that led him to travel across Europe for educational experiences, my parents wrote the checks without blinking an eye. When I asked if I could go on a school trip once, they told me to get a part-time job if I was serious about it. It hurt, and over time, I just got used to it. I was there, just not really there, if that makes any sense. They weren't cruel to me. I had food, clothes, a roof over my head. But love, real attention, that was scarce. I figured maybe I could earn my place if I tried hard enough. I threw myself into my studies, trying to outdo even Alex, though I knew it was a lost cause. He had the brains, and Jessica had the charm. I was just Tom. Ordinary, average Tom. High school was a brutal reminder of this imbalance. Every parent-teacher conference, my parents would show up for Alex and Jessica. When it came to me, though, they'd sometimes forget the dates. Once, I overheard my mom telling a friend that she just couldn't make it to everything with so many kids. And that's how I felt, like the extra child no one expected or planned for. College hit hard. When it was Jessica's turn, they funded everything: tuition, books, even her rent so she could live close to campus without having to work. She focused on her classes, picked up an internship, and graduated with honors. When Alex went, they supported his international programs, paid for private tutors, and even covered his trip to some fancy conference in Switzerland. He graduated debt-free, armed with the best start in life. But when it came to me, the rules suddenly changed. I'll never forget the day I asked if they'd saved anything for me. My dad looked me in the eye and said, "We've already spent so much on your siblings. You'll have to find another way." They helped a bit, but nothing compared to what they'd done for Jessica and Alex. I ended up working 2 jobs while studying just to keep up with tuition. I'd pull all-nighters working at a 24-hour diner and barely make it to class the next morning. It felt unfair, but at some point, I stopped fighting it. It was like I'd grown a callus over the hurt. Things only got worse when Jessica got married. The wedding was straight out of a movie, a fairy tale event they must have poured thousands into. They covered everything: venue, catering, decorations. I remember sitting in the back row, feeling like a guest at someone else's family event. The day wasn't about family celebrating together. It was about showcasing Jessica's perfect life. After the ceremony, my mom found me lingering by the dessert table and told me to mingle more, as if I were some awkward outsider who needed to put on a better show. When it was Alex's turn to tie the knot, they went all out again. He had a destination wedding, and they flew everyone in, covering hotel costs and even a sightseeing tour for the guests. And when I told them I couldn't afford the plane ticket, my mom looked at me, almost annoyed, and said, "Tom, sometimes you need to sacrifice a little for family." I swallowed the bitterness and scraped together whatever I could to make it there. As if that wasn't enough, they'd occasionally bring up how much they'd spent on Jessica and Alex's weddings, almost hinting that I shouldn't expect the same. And they were right. When I eventually got engaged, there were no offers of support. They didn't ask if I needed help with expenses or if I'd even picked a venue. When I finally brought it up, my mom shrugged and said, "Well, you're an adult now, Tom. We've done what we could." Even now, when I try to bring up these memories, to talk about how left out I felt, they wave it off, saying I exaggerate or misunderstand. My mom once told me I was overly sensitive and that I should be grateful for what I got. But I can't shake the feeling that I was just a footnote in their grand story of raising Jessica and Alex. It's hard to admit this out loud, but part of me wonders if I'll ever truly be part of the family, or if I'll always be the extra, the one they didn't plan for and didn't know what to do with. I've heard people say, family is forever, but I'm not sure that's the case for me. Family shouldn't make you feel invisible. For as long as I can remember, family dinners were the same routine. My parents would go on about Jessica and Alex's latest achievements, each story more extravagant than the last. Every Sunday, we'd gather around the table, and my role was just to nod along, barely acknowledged, like my job was to cheer them on and applaud at the right moments. One particular night stands out in my memory. It was one of those evenings where I felt especially invisible, simmering in a quiet resentment. Jessica had just landed a big promotion, a move that practically made her a vice president in her field, as my mom proudly explained. She laid out every detail, from Jessica's new office to the benefits package, even throwing in that she'd have the option for a company car. And Alex? He had been invited to give a presentation at some exclusive conference on the West Coast, his third time this year. It was an endless stream of praise, and my parents beamed like they were watching a movie about their own dreams coming true. As always, they acted like there was no room for anything else. I was there, but only in the most technical sense. Sitting there, I felt like a spectator in my own life. They didn't ask about my work, my life, my plans, never. At that moment, something snapped inside me. All those years of resentment and feeling overlooked boiled over, and I couldn't hold it back anymore. "You know," I said, struggling to keep my voice steady, "it would be nice if you actually cared about what's going on in my life, too." The room went silent. My dad froze, his fork halfway to his mouth, and Jessica raised an eyebrow, as if I'd suddenly spoken a foreign language. My mom's smile faded, replaced by that exasperated look she gave when she thought I was being difficult. "Tom, don't start this," my mom said, waving her hand dismissively. "Tonight is about Jessica and Alex. They've worked hard and we're proud of them." Her words stung, but I couldn't back down. That's every night, though, isn't it? Every dinner, every conversation. It's all about them. "Do you even know what I do for work? Do you even care?" I watched them exchange looks, uncomfortable, like they were trying to decode what I was really saying. Jessica looked at me with a mix of pity and impatience, and Alex wouldn't even meet my eyes. It was like they'd already made up their minds about who I was and what I deserved. "Tom, that's not fair," my dad finally said, setting down his fork. "We've always supported you." "Supported me?" I laughed, bitter and hollow. "You mean like when you told me to figure out college on my own? Or when you acted like it was my fault I couldn't fly across the country for Alex's wedding? You've given them everything. But for me, it's like I'm just here." My mom's face hardened, her voice turning icy. "That's enough, Tom. We've done the best we could. Maybe if you weren't so focused on comparing yourself to others, you'd appreciate what you have." That was the moment I realized there was no winning. No matter what I said, no matter how clearly I laid it out, they wouldn't see it. They had their version of events, and in that version, I was the ungrateful one. Jessica chimed in, as if she couldn't stand the idea of not being the center of attention, even in this argument. "Honestly, Tom," she said, her tone condescending, "you need to grow up. Mom and Dad have done so much for us. Maybe you just don't realize how lucky you are." "Lucky?" I shot back. "You have no idea what it's like to feel invisible, to have to fight for scraps while you two get everything handed to you. You both act like I'm not even part of this family, and they just go along with it." My dad's face was red, not with shame but with anger. "Enough, Tom. If you're so unhappy, maybe you should think about what you're contributing to this family. We're proud of Jessica and Alex because they're making something of themselves. They've earned it." Hearing those words was like a punch to the gut. All I wanted was a sliver of recognition, a sign that I mattered to them, too. But in their eyes, I was an inconvenience, a child who was somehow undeserving. They weren't listening. They were defending themselves, their choices, their golden image of our family, and I felt like I was suffocating under the weight of it all. Unable to stand it any longer, I pushed back my chair, the sound scraping painfully against the floor. You know what? I'm done trying to be part of this family when it's clear I never will be. Enjoy your perfect children. And with that, I walked out. I didn't know where I was going, only that I couldn't be there anymore. Sitting in that room where I was nothing more than a shadow in the glow of their favorite children. After that night, things only got worse. My parents made it clear that my outburst had crossed a line. I thought they'd reach out, try to understand where I was coming from, maybe try to see things from my perspective. But instead, they closed ranks. Jessica and Alex barely spoke to me, acting as if I'd committed some unforgivable crime. It was as if I'd shattered the illusion of the perfect family, and now they had to sweep me out of the picture to keep it intact. I tried, for a while, to let it go, to move past the argument, to pretend that things were normal. But the hurt and resentment just kept festering. Family gatherings became unbearable, each one a reminder of how little I mattered to them. They'd talk about Jessica's wedding plans, Alex's new job, and I'd sit there, silent, feeling like a stranger at my own family table. One day, I decided to confront them again, hoping that maybe they'd see reason, that maybe my absence from their lives would have softened their stance. I asked them to meet at a coffee shop, away from the house, where I thought we could talk like adults, without the family dynamics clouding everything. When they arrived, they looked at me with that same look of disappointment, as if my very presence was a burden. I took a deep breath and started, trying to explain how I'd felt for years, how much it hurt to be ignored, to be treated as an afterthought. But they didn't want to hear it. My mom cut me off, saying I was dragging the family down with my selfish complaints. My dad sat there, arms crossed, staring at his coffee, refusing to engage. Jessica wasn't there, and Alex, I later found out, had chosen not to come because he didn't want to deal with the drama. In that moment, I realized just how deep the rift was. They weren't just ignoring my pain. They were outright denying it, refusing to acknowledge that they'd done anything wrong. To them, I was the problem, the ungrateful son who didn't appreciate what he'd been given. I left that coffee shop feeling more alone than I ever had in my life. They didn't care, not really. To them, I was a shadow, a ghost, something they could ignore without a second thought. After that disaster of a coffee shop meeting, something changed in me. It was like a heavy curtain had finally been lifted. For the first time, I stopped hoping for things to get better with my family. They weren't going to wake up one day and suddenly see me. They had their version of the story, and in it, I was nothing but a supporting character, if that. So, I did the only thing that made sense. I walked away. The decision didn't come easy. Walking away from your family isn't something you do on a whim, even if they've made you feel invisible your entire life. But I knew I had to create something of my own, something they couldn't ignore, something that could stand on its own, whether they acknowledged it or not. I started small, taking on freelance projects in web design. It wasn't glamorous, but I had a knack for it, and I liked the creative control it gave me. I'd work out of my cramped apartment, pulling all-nighters, trying to learn everything I could about the business. There was no fallback plan, no safety net if things went wrong, and no one to bail me out. I knew I couldn't mess this up. I had to make it work, or I'd be right back at square one. The early days were rough. I'd reach out to potential clients, send proposal after proposal, only to hear radio silence. Weeks went by without a single response, and I started to wonder if I was fooling myself. I was barely scraping by, picking up odd jobs to make rent, anything to keep the lights on while I waited for my big break. Then I met Sam, a startup founder who was looking for someone to redesign his website on a shoestring budget. He wasn't exactly my ideal client. Sam was a tough guy to deal with, demanding, and more than a bit condescending. But I needed the money, so I took the job. Working with him was a nightmare. He'd nitpick every detail, call me at all hours, and make impossible demands. But I stuck it out, knowing that if I could get through this, I'd prove to myself that I could handle anything. One night, after yet another grueling round of revisions, I was ready to quit. I'd had enough of Sam's impossible standards and his constant criticism. But as I stared at the code on my screen, something clicked. I realized that this was exactly what I needed to face, the kind of challenge that would make or break me. So, I pushed through, finishing the project exactly to his specifications. When I finally delivered the final product, something unexpected happened. Sam was thrilled. He introduced me to some of his contacts, who were also looking for web developers. Suddenly, I had a steady stream of clients, and I wasn't scraping by anymore. For the first time, I felt like I was actually getting somewhere. Building my business wasn't just about making money. It was about proving to myself that I didn't need anyone's help, least of all my family's. The more I worked, the more I felt that sense of pride, the kind that came from knowing I'd earned every bit of success on my own. I began to see myself differently, not as the overlooked middle child, but as someone capable, independent, and strong. A few months later, I crossed paths with Megan, an old college friend who had gone into marketing. She'd heard about my work through a mutual acquaintance, and she was curious about my new venture. We met for coffee to catch up, and I ended up telling her everything. My family drama, the sleepless nights, the struggle to make it on my own. Megan listened without judgment, nodding thoughtfully as I laid it all out. Then she looked me square in the eye and said, "Tom, you've done all this by yourself? That's huge. Do you realize how many people can't say that?" Her words hit me harder than I expected. She was right. I'd done it all on my own. And for once, I let myself feel proud of that. Megan and I started collaborating on projects. She handled the marketing side, bringing in clients, while I focused on the tech and design work. Together, we were unstoppable. Business was booming, and for the first time, I wasn't just surviving, I was thriving. We were pulling in big clients, companies that actually paid well, and I was able to hire a small team. People who believed in the business I'd built, who saw value in what I was creating. But success came with its own set of challenges. As the business grew, so did the stress. Late nights turned into early mornings, and sometimes I'd barely sleep. Megan and I argued about everything, from project deadlines to client management, but we always managed to find common ground. She'd become not only my business partner, but my best friend, someone I could lean on when things got tough. Just when things were starting to look up, I received a text from my mom. She wanted to catch up and asked if I'd be interested in meeting for lunch. I stared at my phone, trying to process the message. After everything that had happened, after they'd brushed me aside and made it clear I wasn't a priority, now she wanted to reconnect? Curiosity got the better of me. I agreed to meet her, if only to see what she had to say. We met at a small cafe, and as I sat across from her, I could see the discomfort in her eyes. She wasn't used to this, to me standing on my own, successful in a way that didn't involve her or my dad. She started with small talk, asking about my work, my business, things she'd never cared to ask about before. I kept my answers brief, guarded, unwilling to let her back in too easily. Finally, she got to the point. Jessica was struggling. Her marriage was on the rocks, and she was having financial problems. My mom wanted to know if I could lend a hand. Given that I was doing so well now, I was stunned. After all the years of neglect, the years of feeling like I didn't matter, they'd come to me, not out of care or interest in my life, but because they needed something. Anger bubbled up inside me, and for a moment, I couldn't even speak. They hadn't asked about me in years, hadn't reached out when I was struggling, but now they wanted my help. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. "Mom," I said slowly, "I built this business on my own, without any support. When I needed help, you were nowhere to be found. And now, after all this time, you come to me because Jessica needs something?" She tried to backtrack, stammering that it wasn't like that she was just hoping to reconnect. But I could see the truth. They hadn't changed. They still saw me as the backup plan, the one who'd pick up the pieces when their favorites fell apart. I shook my head, gathering my things. "I'm sorry, but I can't help. I worked too hard to get here, and I'm not going to let you drag me back into that old cycle. I have my own life now, and I'm finally happy." I walked out of that cafe with a newfound sense of freedom. I had broken free from their hold, from the constant feeling that I was less than. I'd built something that was mine, something they couldn't take away, and I knew I didn't need their approval anymore. In the months that followed, the business continued to grow. Megan and I expanded our team, brought on new clients, and even opened an office. Life was good, and for the first time, I felt like I was living on my own terms. Looking back, I realized that walking away from my family was the best decision I'd ever made. It hadn't been easy, and the scars of those years still lingered, but I was stronger for it. I'd built a life that I was proud of, a life that no one could take away. And in the end, that was all I'd ever really wanted. It had been a few years since that awkward lunch with my mom at the cafe. I hadn't heard much from her or my dad since then, except for the occasional obligatory holiday card or a forwarded family group email. My life was full, busy, and honestly, much more peaceful without them. The business Megan and I built had expanded beyond what I ever imagined. We'd grown from a small, scrappy team to a full-fledged agency with real clients, a proper office, and employees who relied on us. The sense of pride I felt was almost foreign to me, a mix of confidence and calm that I hadn't known growing up. Then, one morning, my phone buzzed with a call from an unknown number. Usually, I ignored those, assuming it was some spam or telemarketer. But something nudged me to pick up, and when I did, I immediately recognized the voice on the other end. It was my dad. "Tom," he started, sounding unsure, as though he wasn't sure I'd even remember who he was. "I hope I'm not calling at a bad time." Hearing his voice after so long was strange. It stirred up memories I'd thought I'd buried, but I stayed polite, keeping my tone neutral. "Hey, Dad, it's been a while. What's up?" There was a pause, and I could feel his discomfort through the phone. "Yeah, I know. Sorry about that. We've just been going through some things, and well, I didn't know who else to call." I braced myself, expecting to hear something about Jessica or Alex, maybe another wedding, or that one of them was having a child. But as my dad continued, I realized this call was about something else entirely. "It's your mom and me," he said slowly. Things aren't going so well for us right now. Financially, Jessica and Alex, they've both moved out of state, busy with their own lives, and with the medical bills piling up, we're in a bit of a tough spot." A wave of emotions hit me, one after the other. Part of me felt almost vindicated, like this was some cosmic justice for the way they treated me. Another part of me felt a flicker of guilt, a tugging sense of obligation that hadn't fully faded, despite everything. But most of all, I felt conflicted. "Medical bills?" I asked, keeping my voice steady, although a knot of anxiety was forming in my chest. "Yeah," my dad replied, his voice softer. "Your mom's been having some health issues. The doctors have been running all these tests, but it's been tough, financially. Insurance doesn't cover everything, I took a deep breath, processing what he was telling me. Growing up, they had been the ones who always had control, who made the decisions, who set the rules. Now they were the ones asking for help. I didn't know whether to feel anger, pity, or some strange mix of both. "Look, Dad," I said, my voice more guarded than I intended. "Why are you coming to me? Jessica and Alex were always well. Let's just say you didn't exactly look to me for support in the past." He was silent for a moment, then sighed heavily. "Tom, I know we haven't been fair to you. I realize now that we probably put a lot on your shoulders that shouldn't have been there. And maybe we didn't treat you the way you deserved. But Jessica's got her own family now, and Alex is working on a big project abroad. We're out of options." His words hit harder than I expected. He sounded defeated. My dad, who had always acted like he had it all together, was practically begging. I didn't know what to say, so I stayed quiet, letting the weight of the silence settle over us. "Look," he continued, breaking the silence, "I'm not asking for charity, Tom. Just maybe a loan. Something to help us get back on our feet. We'd pay you back as soon as we could." I could feel the old resentment bubbling up, memories of years spent feeling like I didn't matter to them, like I was nothing but a backup plan. But at the same time, I couldn't ignore the tiny voice in my head reminding me that they were still my parents. They were flawed, yes, but they'd raised me, even if they hadn't done it perfectly. "I'll think about it," I finally said, keeping my voice neutral. I ended the call, feeling like the ground beneath me had shifted. The next few days were filled with an uneasy tension. Part of me wanted to cut them off, to leave them to deal with their own mistakes. But another part of me, a part one hadn't known was still there, felt the pull of family, the lingering sense that, despite everything, they were still my blood. Eventually, I decided to reach out, but on my terms. I set up a meeting at my office, away from the familiar surroundings that might trigger old habits. When they arrived, they looked different than I remembered. My dad seemed smaller somehow, his shoulders hunched, and my mom's face was lined with worry, her eyes tired and dimmed. We sat down, and I went straight to the point. "I'll help you," I said, watching their faces carefully. Relief washed over my mom's face, and my dad's shoulders visibly relaxed. But I continued, holding up a hand. "There are conditions." My dad's face tightened, but he nodded. "Whatever you say, Tom." "First," I said, my voice firm, "this isn't a handout. It's a loan, just like you said. I'll cover your immediate needs, but I want it in writing that you'll pay it back when you're able." They nodded, glancing at each other, clearly uncomfortable. I knew this was humiliating for them, but I didn't care. I needed them to understand that things had changed. I wasn't the neglected son anymore. I was someone they had to take seriously. "Second," I added, "I want complete transparency about your finances. I'm not just going to throw money at this and hope for the best. If I'm helping, I need to know exactly where the money is going." They hesitated, but eventually agreed. It was clear they weren't thrilled with my conditions, but they had no other choice. They needed me, and for once, the power dynamic was in my hands. After we finalized the details, I wrote them a check, covering the most pressing bills. As they left my office, I felt a strange mix of emotions: relief, sadness, and, surprisingly, a sense of closure. I'd done what I needed to do, and I didn't owe them anything more. The weeks that followed were tense but manageable. They sent me updates on their finances, and slowly, I saw them start to stabilize. I even visited them a few times, each visit less tense than the last. It was clear that they'd finally come to see me in a new light, not as the overlooked son, but as someone who had built a life on his own terms. One day, my mom pulled me aside after dinner. "Tom," she said, her voice soft, "I know we weren't the parents you deserved, and I know we put you through a lot. I'm sorry." Her words caught me off guard, and for a moment, I didn't know how to respond. But then, I nodded, feeling a weight lift from my shoulders. "It's okay, Mom," I said, and for the first time, I realized that maybe, just maybe, I actually meant it. It was strange how life had turned out. There I was, sitting in my office, staring at the latest update from my parents about their finances, and for the first time in years, I felt nothing. Not anger, not sadness, not even satisfaction. Just nothing. It was as if my heart had finally gone numb from the endless cycle of family tension and resentment. And in that silence, a truth echoed back at me. I didn't owe them anything. I leaned back in my chair, rubbing my temples, feeling the weight of the past few weeks pressing down on me. I had done more than enough to help them. I had given them money, time, and most importantly, another chance. But no matter how much I gave, it never seemed to be enough. They always needed more. More understanding, more patience, more of me. And I was tired, so tired of giving. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel an immediate need to fix things, to be the responsible one, to be the person they turned to when things fell apart. And as that realization sank in, I felt something else creeping in, a sense of relief. I didn't have to keep this up. I could walk away if I wanted, and they would have to figure it out on their own. After all these years of being ignored, overlooked, and taken for granted, I finally had the power to say no. I sat there for a long time, just letting that thought settle in. It was freeing, and yet, at the same time, it scared me. I wasn't used to putting myself first. For so long, I had been trying to earn their approval, to prove that I was worth something. And now that I finally had a chance to break free from that need, I didn't know what to do with it. Just then, Megan walked in, breaking me out of my thoughts. She took one look at me and raised an eyebrow, her usual mix of sarcasm and empathy in her gaze. Megan had been my rock throughout this entire ordeal. She was the one who listened to my late-night rants, who reminded me of my worth when my parents' indifference threatened to drag me down. And in that moment, I felt grateful for her presence in my life, for the grounding force she'd become. "You look like you've been hit by a truck," she said, dropping into the chair across from me. "Feels that way," I muttered, pushing the paper across the desk toward her. Latest update from the parents. She scanned it quickly, her expression unreadable. "So, what's the plan? Going to bail them out again?" I shrugged, not meeting her eyes. "I don't know. Part of me feels like I should, like I owe it to them. But another part, I just don't know if I have it in me anymore, Meg." She nodded, leaning back in her chair. "You've done more than enough, Tom. You've gone above and beyond what anyone could expect. They weren't there for you when you needed them. So why should you feel obligated to be there for them now?" Her words hit a nerve, and I felt a pang of guilt, mixed with a flicker of satisfaction. It was true. I'd spent so much of my life trying to prove myself to people who didn't seem to care, and now, when I finally had the chance to walk away, I felt like I was betraying some unspoken code of loyalty. I don't know," I said, struggling to find the right words. Part of me wants them to see that I don't need them, that I'm better off without their approval. But another part, I don't know if I'm ready to let go of that need. Megan reached across the desk, giving my hand a reassuring squeeze. "Listen, Tom, you don't owe them anything. You've built something incredible, something they had no part in. You've given them second chances, but they have to want to change. If they don't, that's on them, not you." Her words hung in the air, sinking into the spaces that years of resentment and guilt had carved out. And as much as I wanted to believe her, part of me still clung to the hope that maybe, just maybe, my parents would finally see me for who I was. But deep down, I knew that wasn't likely. People didn't change overnight, and my parents, well, they were set in their ways. I decided not to give them an answer right away. I needed time to think, to figure out what I really wanted, not what they expected of me. So, I sent them a brief message, saying that I needed some time to process everything. It wasn't a lie. I genuinely did need time. But more than that, I wanted to see if they would respect my boundaries for once, if they would let me have this space without pushing for more. Days turned into weeks, and for the first time in years, my phone was blissfully silent. No desperate calls, no guilt-ridden messages, just silence. And in that silence, I found something I hadn't felt in a long time: peace. In the meantime, I threw myself into my work, focusing on the projects and clients that had become my lifeline. Megan and I took on new challenges, pushing the business to new heights. We landed a major contract with a national brand, and the satisfaction of that success was sweeter than I could have ever imagined. For once, I was living my life on my own terms, free from the weight of my family's expectations. But just when I thought I'd finally escaped the cycle, I received an unexpected call from my mom. Her voice was different, softer, almost hesitant, and for a moment, I felt a pang of concern. "Tom," she began, her voice wavering, "I know I haven't been the mother you needed, and I know we've hurt you in ways that can't be undone, but I want you to know that we're proud of you. We really are." Her words caught me off guard, and I didn't know how to respond. For so long, I had craved that validation, that acknowledgement that I was worth something. But now that I had it, it felt hollow, almost like an afterthought. "Thanks, Mom," I said, my voice guarded. "I appreciate that." There was a long pause, and then she continued, her tone more urgent. "Tom, we really do need your help. I know we haven't been there for you, but please, don't turn your back on us now." I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of her words pressing down on me. Part of me wanted to cave, to give them what they wanted, just to end the tension. But another part of me, the part that had fought so hard to build a life of my own, resisted. "I'll think about it," I said finally, my voice steady. And with that, I ended the call, feeling a strange mix of relief and exhaustion. I didn't have to make a decision right away. For once, I could take my time, think things through, and do what was best for me. In the days that followed, I found myself reflecting on everything that had led me to this point. The years of feeling invisible, the constant need for approval, the resentment that had built up over time. It was all still there, buried beneath layers of newfound success and independence. But now, I had a choice. I could let it consume me, or I could let it go. In the end, I chose to wait. I didn't give them an answer, and for the first time, I felt okay with that. I had finally broken free from the need to please, the need to be someone I wasn't, just to earn their love. And in that freedom, I found a sense of peace I had been searching for all my life.